I'm Alan Woods, and welcome to Chapter 4 of the Washington State Beekeepers Association Apprentice Beekeeping course, where we will look at seasonal management. When looking at seasonal management, it is important to understand that there is a balance between the overmanagement of a colony and lack of management, and it does take experience to recognize the right balance for both you and each colony. This is because beginner beekeepers tend to open the hive more than necessary due to the lack of experience. While on the other hand, knowing when it is necessary to open the hive and what you are looking for when monitoring the health of the colony is critical for their survival. There are three simple rules for a beekeeper to be successful. First, keep them dry. Remember, a wet bee is a dead bee. Second, keep them well fed, ensuring that the colony has access to a variety of flowers for nectar and pollen to forage during the beekeeping season and provide supplementary feeding if necessary. And finally, keep varroa mites under control. Remember, testing, monitoring the numbers, and treating for varroa mites when necessary are a critical part of seasonal responsibilities. In Washington State, because of the various temperature changes and weather conditions in different locations, keeping bees is not a one-size-fits-all proposition. Therefore, one of the major responsibilities of a beekeeper is knowing what will influence the site of your apiary and understanding the location where you have placed your bees. This task can be easily accomplished by keeping a bee journal or log giving a historical record of weather condition and other circumstances that may impact the management needed for your colonies. In this chapter, we'll look at the seasonal management responsibilities of beekeeping for the spring, summer, fall, and winter. Spring management is by far the most demanding of all seasons for the beekeeper. During this time, you may be required to add storage if the colony is low, examine and determine how your overwinter losses occurred if you have any, and set up new hive equipment and purchase nukes or packages to install in them. This is also the time when you get to inspect your overwinter hive, preparing it for the spring buildup, split the colony if they need it, and prepare for swarming. Please understand that your ability to perform spring management tasks may determine the outcome of your colonies in the fall. Let's take a closer look at spring management for the months of February and March. Spring management can start as early as February in some parts of the state and as late as March in others. However, the rule of thumb is to wait for a calm, sunny day when the temperature reaches at least 50 degrees Fahrenheit before you perform your first visual hive inspection. This means you get to remove the top cover, look in, and listen for signs that the colony is still alive. However, if you have been observing the outside of the hive, you should have already had a good indication if the colony is still alive. You would have seen flying bees outside the hive when it's warm, as well as yellowish brown droppings outside the side of the hive and in the snow if its presence from the bees relieving themselves when the temperature raises. You will also see new dead bees around the entrance of the hive. While seeing or hearing the colony is always a pleasure after the winter hiatus, keep in mind that unless you are 100% positive that the colony is dead, do not open the hive boxes. Once you know that the colony is alive, you want to check to determine if the colony has enough stores available. Let's check for stores. While checking for stores, you want to keep in mind that it is still too cold to remove frames from the hive since you could chill the brood and kill them. Getting into the habit of weighing your hive, even if just lifting it on one end, not only helps you to know when there's a honey flow on, but also helps you determine how much stores a colony has at any time of the year. colonies short of food will be quite light and relatively easy to lift. If feed is needed, either insert a frame of honey that you bank from your own hives after allowing them to completely thaw. You can use fondant, winter patties, or place a paper towel or newspaper over the brood and pour pure cane sugar on it. Do not use regular pollen patties at this time, as it is high in protein and the bees will have to expel it. Let's take a look at the causes of overwinter losses. If after opening your hive you find the colony dead, remove the frames to determine how the bees died. If you see bees head first with their entire body in the cell, they died of starvation and was probably looking for food when a sudden temperature drop prevented them from returning to the cluster. A second cause of death is moisture buildup. If you see wet bees, the hive was probably not properly ventilated, causing the bees to die. Another cause is simply not having enough bees to form a cluster and prevent winter die-off. And finally, disease or pest, mainly the varroa mite, which spreads disease in the colony, making them too weak to winter the hive. Let's take a look at the spring management for the month of April. The management month of April and possibly May is the time to get bees. In this section, we will look at a package of bees as well as a nuke. The beginner beekeeper will normally purchase a package of bees or a nuke. The packaged bees obtained from suppliers to Washington State are usually created from bees that have been in California for almond pollination and usually consist of 3 pounds of bees, which is about 10,000 individual bees, an unrelated queen in a separate cage, and a can of sugar syrup. These bees come from multiple donor colonies that have been shaken into a screen box without frames, combs, or brood. Packages are created to prevent swarming and for income that are sold to beekeepers needing additional colonies. The cans of sugar syrup can supply the packages for 4 to 5 days during shipment and are inserted into the packages after the queen in a separate cage has been placed into the box. Many factors can influence this timing, usually all weather related. So knowing the reputation of the bee supplier is important. This information is also available through your local association and local beekeepers. Please watch the attached video on making packages. So now that we know what a package is, let's take a look at a nuke. A nuke is short for nucleus, which is a small colony consisting of 3 to 5 langstroth frames which have been pulled or drawn out. A 5-frame nuke has 3 frames of brood in various stages of development, a frame of honey, and a frame with pollen. The queen should be a mated carrier queen that has been accepted by the workers and has been laying. The bee supplier who has created this nuke has taken the responsibility of ensuring that there is a viable queen in the colony and the colony has begun its work as a corporate unit. This can be a benefit for a new beekeeper who isn't sure that they want to install a package and then monitor the queen release and performance for the next few weeks. Nukes will cost more and may arrive later in the spring than a package. They will also come with used frames, which is usually not a problem if purchased from a reputable supplier. However, care should be taken to replace old frames as you would for your own frames, rotating or replacing used comb foundation every 3 years to minimize chemical and disease contamination. If purchasing a nuke, ask the supplier if the bees have been treated for varroa mites, and when so, that you are able to test and treat as appropriate. To get a better idea on how to install packages and nukes, please watch the additional short videos on these subjects. Now let us look at the busy spring management month of May. In this section, we'll look at when and how to split a colony, how to conduct your first inspection, how to prepare for a swarm, as well as how to prevent one. Usually by the end of April in most areas, weak hives that have overwintered and have 6 or less frames covered with bees should be united with strong hives having 10 or more frames covered with bees. To unite hives, place the one with the queen you wish to save on top of the other with a sheet of newspaper between the two. The bees will chew their way through the paper and unite without fighting. The two united hives will sometimes bring in more pollen and nectar than two individual hives combined. Remember, one good hive is better than several weak ones. There is no need to find either queen before uniting the hives because they may live together for some time, but usually the better queen will eliminate the weaker. A queenless hive can be handled the same way. In this case, put the colony with the queen on top of the hive without the queen, placing a newspaper between the two as well. If you have several strong hives and several weak hives in your apiary, another option is to switch the hive locations between the strong and the weak hives. This works best during the nectar flow when there are many foragers coming and going. By switching the location of the strong hive with the weak hive, the foragers will return to the site of their home, which is now the weak hive. They will continue with their task since their focus is on bringing in nectar and pollen, and the guard bees at the new location are pleased to receive what they're bringing in. Not only does this help the weak colony, but it also benefits the strong hive as it may discourage them from swarming. So regardless of the type of split that you're doing, they all require that you monitor the space in the hive. Remember, when a box or a hive is at least 3/4 full, you should add additional boxes, supers, or top bars to the existing one. Maintaining adequate space in a hive is important. Monitoring the space available in your hive can be done by weighing without constantly conducting internal inspections. However, there are times when the internal inspection is critical, one of them being just before swarm season. One of the catchphrases you will continually encounter as a beekeeper is routine inspection. In this section, we will cover the steps of a routine inspection as well as address the question of how often should it be performed. When conducting a routine inspection, the first step is to observe the outside of the hive first. Watching the action of the bees that are flying in and out of the hive with pollen or nectar, seeing if the bees on the ground in front of the hive are aimlessly crawling around, noticing ants, yellow jackets, or other pests at the entrance or entering the hive. These are just a few things that you can use to help you learn the condition of your hive as well as what's going on inside the hive by simply observing the outside first. And while you should restrict the number of times that you go into the hive, there is no limit to the number of times that you can observe the hive from the outside. After you observe what's going on the outside of the hive, weigh the hive and annotate the weight and the contents of the hive to include the hive equipment present, the number of frames with bees, drawn comb with pollen and nectar. Keeping this information in a log will keep you informed of the hive's development. So remember, depending on what you see on the outside will determine if you need to look on the inside. Also, you should not do a routine hive inspection more than once every 2 weeks. This is because every time you inspect the inside of the hive, you disrupt the bees, setting them back on their development. However, if there is something specific that you notice or are monitoring, open the hive. Now let's take a look inside of the hive. There are a few things you must remember before opening the hive to do a routine hive inspection. First, the temperature must be 60 degrees Fahrenheit or above. It must be a calm, dry day with no wind. You should have a plan of what you need to do before opening the hive. That means knowing what you are going in the hive for and have all the equipment and tools that you need present before going in. Oh, and make sure that you have something to write with. Once you are in the hive, you do not want to be in for any extended period of time, but you do want to get as much done as you can during this time to prevent from having to go back in at a later date earlier than 2 weeks. So now that we observed the outside of the hive, we've waited, we have a plan and everything that we need to do our inspection. Let me show you what you're going to be looking for. First, you're going to look at eggs, larvae, and brood. You're going to look at the colors on the frame to determine if the frame is healthy or not. You're going to look at the patterns on the frame. We're going to look at supersedure and swarm cells and what to do if the bees need more space. While it is not necessary to see the queen during this inspection, it is very important that you see signs of her. The presence of eggs indicate that the queen was there at least 3 days ago. While the eggs may be hard to see, the larvae and the capped brood will be easier to observe. Remember, there are 3 stages. There is the egg up to 3 days, at which time it turns into a larva. Once the cell is capped and the brood is covered, it is then a pupa. As you observe the eggs, larvae, and brood during the inspection, the colors within that frame matters. There should only be 1 egg per cell, and they should be white. The uncapped larva should be a bright white and glycerin. If either of these are brown or dark in color, it could be a sign of infection or disease. However, the brood may vary from a bright yellow to brown. But if the cell is sunken, have pinholes, or odor, it may be diseased too. When performing a routine hive inspection, it is critical to see if there are any supersedure or swarm cells present. While each of the cells are created for different reasons, it is important that we can identify them as well as understand why they were created. First, the supersedures are often formed in the middle of the frame, while the swarm cells are often formed at the bottom of the cell. However, when a supersedure cell is formed, it normally means that the colony has decided to replace the existing queen because she is not laying enough eggs, she is no longer present, or she has been killed at the hand of a new beekeeper. While on the other hand, swarm cells could mean the hive is preparing to swarm or has already swarmed because the hive is overcrowded or it is just healthy and wants to reproduce. Nevertheless, there are things that can be done to help minimize swarming, and this topic will be covered in more detail in the section on swarm prevention. The rule of thumb is when a hive body is 3/4 full, add more space. This is an easy to remember formula that applies to all hives, the Langstroth, long Langstroth, the Warray, as well as the top bar hive. Adding more space will help the hive grow and reduce swarming. In an overwintered hive, the brood will be located in the top hive box and the bottom will be empty. It is a good practice to switch the top hive box to the bottom and let the bees build up. When the bees begin to develop a vast amount of stores, move the honey frames to the top, keep the brood frame on the bottom. This will create a honey barrier in which the queen should not cross, stopping her from laying eggs in the super, which will be placed on the top hive body. Remember, waiting until the hive body is full to add more space will result in problems for your hive. Now that we've covered routine hive inspections, let's look at how to deal with swarms. Giving the bees room does not mean putting on an extra super, as this will not deter swarming. The room needs to be added in the brood area. However, this will only deter the bees from swarming if their desire is due to congestion and not natural reproduction. Bees will swarm for overcrowding and reproduction. A reproductive swarm is difficult to control once the bees have made up their minds that they are healthy enough and food is available. The first sign that a colony may be preparing to swarm is the creation of a queen cell. However, just because you find queen cells started doesn't mean the swarming is imminent. It's only when eggs are laid in them that you know the colony has decided to swarm. But the construction of the queen cell and the laying of an egg in it is just the start of their preparation. After the egg is laid, the new queen will emerge in 16 days, and now it's time to get the old queen in flight condition. Because the queen relies so much on the bees for her care, this is an easy task. The bees will begin to feed the queen less and less, resulting in the reduction of the egg she lay, as well as the size of her abdomen. Nurse bees will aggressively push, shake, and nip at the queen, keeping her moving, where she will lose 25% of her body weight. In this section, I will show you how to prevent a swarm by creating a split, understanding how to relieve congestion in the brood area, and providing space for nectar and pollen, as well as keeping the hive properly ventilated. If a colony looks very strong in the early spring, it is wise to attempt to control swarming by dividing the colony. If this is done prior to seeing swarm cells, the colony may not have begun preparing for swarming and may be deterred. To divide the colony and create a split, Take the frame with the swarm cell if present, or eggs if not, and add 1 to 2 frames of brood, 1 to 2 frames of storage, ensuring that the queen is not on any of the frames, and place them in a nuke box or a hive body, ensuring to add as many empty frames as needed to fill the box and separate it from the original hive. Monitor both hives by checking on them in 2 weeks to see if there are eggs in the original hive, meaning the queen is still there, or if there is a queen cell, meaning that the colony may be trying to raise a new queen. In the new hive, see if the queen cell has been sealed or has hatched, and if there is young brood. Depending on the status of the queen cell, it may take longer before you see signs of new eggs. So don't give up until at least 4 weeks have passed without signs of new eggs or larvae. If this is the case, you can merge the colony with another colony or try to introduce a frame of new eggs or a new queen. Remember, swarming is the natural method of reproduction. Giving the bees room does not mean putting on an extra super, as this will not deter swarming. The room needs to be added in the brood area. However, this will only deter the bees from swarming if their desire is due to congestion and not natural reproduction. Bees will swarm for overcrowding and reproduction. The typical method of adding additional space to a hive is by placing a honey super on top of the hive, providing space for nectar from late April to mid-August. You must ensure that the colony has enough ventilation in the hive throughout the year. It is important, especially as the weather warms up and the hives fill with bees. This concludes the spring management portion of this course. Now let's take a look at summer management. In this section, I will show you how to prepare the colony for fall and winter, how to monitor the food storage and determine if there's enough honey to harvest from the hive. I will also show you why testing, monitoring, and treating for mites, as well as how to and when to use supplemental feed, is important. While spring management is a busy time of the year for the beekeeper, summer is an important time for the bees. Even though the weather is nice and the bees are very active, this is the time to start preparing the colony for fall and winter. This starts by you preparing for the honey flow, where the bees will begin to store up excess honey. This is where the initial weighing of the hive and the inventory of the hive components come in. By knowing the weight of the hive and how much space is in it, you now have the ability to monitor the available space and add additional equipment for honey stores. Remembering the rule of thumb of if it's 3/4 full, add more space. This will also play an important part in the prevention of swarming, as you will need a full hive of bees going into the fall. One of the most important aspects of preparing for the fall for the beekeeper is the ability to monitor hive stores. While this may not seem to be important in the middle of a honey flow, it is very important for the colony as it prepares to go into the fall. Therefore, as a beekeeper, if you are planning on harvesting honey for yourself, you must first make sure that there will be enough for the colony in the fall. In August, the beekeeper must determine if they will harvest honey, as the hive will plateau soon and the critical resources that the colony may need to survive may not be available. In order to determine if the harvest will be possible, the hive should weigh between 100 to 120 pounds going into the fall, not including the super. Another important task in preparing for the fall and winter is to test for mites, monitor, and treat. One of the quickest ways to lose your hive is to allow your mite count to get out of control. It is important that you constantly test for, monitor the number of mites in the colony, and treat when necessary. However, remember to remove any honey that you are planning on harvesting before treating. We will also cover mite testing, monitoring, and treating in the next chapter. Just as it is important to monitor the hive and treat for mites when necessary, it is equally important to monitor the weight of the hive for stores and, if necessary, use supplemental feed. Supplemental feed is necessary when there is a dearth where very little pollen can be found or there is no nectar available. In both these situations, the beekeeper should be prepared to provide the colony with a high-quality pollen substitute and or sugar syrup, as they are both important supplements that can assist the colony in preparing for the fall and winter. Now let us take a look at fall management. In this section, we will cover all the steps needed to prepare the hive for winter. We will look at supplemental feed, moisture control shims, removing partially filled supers, relocating the hive if necessary, using mouse guards to keep predators out, and using the top entrance to prevent the bees from being trapped in the hive. While it is very important to try to get the hive to the 100 to 120 pound mark, it may be necessary to use supplemental feed to get there. Carbohydrates are essential for the bees to maintain heat in the hive during the winter months, and this is what they use honey for. If you must use supplemental feed, use a 2-part sugar to a 1-part water sugar syrup mixture. That's pound to pound. For example, 1 gallon of water weighs 8 pounds. Therefore, you would need 16 pounds of sugar. This mixture can be used until the temperature constantly drops below 60 degrees, at which time you will need to switch to a solid feed like a candy board, fondant, or granulated sugar. It is a well-known fact that the cold does not kill bees, but moisture does. For this reason, you should minimize potential moisture buildup during the winter months. This occurs when the heat from the cluster hits the top of the hive, which is cold on the outside, and condensation forms on the inside and drops on the bees. The easiest way to deal with this is to use a shim or shallow hive body with absorbent material placed on top. You can use dry leaves or cedar chips in a burlap sack. While a shim or a shallow hive box helps control moisture, it can also be used for supplemental feeding in the winter. During fall management, as you prepare your hive for the winter, you should remove all partially filled supers to allow the bees to cluster closely. It is during this time that you should ensure that the queen excluder has been removed, as you do not want to restrict the queen during the winter. When considering your hive location, remember, just because the hive does well in one location during the summer doesn't mean that it is a suitable location in the winter. Strong winds can cause major problems for your hive, so you may have to relocate it to a more suitable location. However, do not put it in a heated building, as this will cause the bees to rear brood without the resources to take care of them. Mice are another major consideration during the winter. They will enter any place that they can fit to stay warm and will invade a hive with a large enough entrance. It is advisable that you restrict the entrance where the bees can enter and leave, but mice cannot. You can use a mouse guard or a wire entrance that mice cannot access. When preparing for the winter months, when snow, leaves, and even dead bees can block the hive entrance, trapping the bees in the hive, it is advisable to tilt the hive slightly forward, as well as having a small entrance under the telescopic top or outer cover to allow the bees to get out to take periodic cleansing flights when the temperature permits. So now that we are prepared for fall, let's take a look and see what we need to do in the winter. Everything that the beekeeper has done during the past 3 seasons has prepared the colony for its long winter journey. While there is no more that the beekeeper can do inside the hive, it's up to the colony now. When the outside temperature drops to below 57 degrees, the bees will start to cluster. The cluster will form near the top of the box, spanning between the frames, as the cluster must always be in contact with the stores. The cluster's purpose is not to keep the beehive warm, rather it is to keep the cluster warm. The cluster is made up of the mantle and the core. The mantle is made up of a 1 to 3 inch thick shell of bees that surround the core, which maintains the temperature of 48 to 57 degrees and acts as an insulator for the core. The bees spend 8 to 16 days on the outer layer and rotate based on hunger and not temperature. The core is made up of bees in the center of the mantle that are not compacted but walk around and manages the affair of the colony while maintaining a temperature between 70 and 85 degrees. They maintain this temperature by thermogenics, shivering. All this energy is fueled by honey. The bees use 5 to 6 pounds of honey per winter month to keep warm. This concludes Chapter 4 of the Washington State Beekeepers Association Apprentice course. Please complete all assigned reading and videos for this chapter, as well as joining me for a 1-hour chapter review at the appointed date and time.